Good evening. It's a Sunday night. How are we doing? Oh, it's a Monday night. What am I talking about? Today was Memorial Day. That's why it felt different. Let me get the video in front of me, see who is with us. Got a very interesting page for today. Oh, it's a Monday night. Okay. And here we go. Okay, beautiful. Live on YouTube, live on Facebook. All right, who's in the house? Where are you tuning in from? Let us dedicate tonight's learning to the people we honor today on Memorial Day. Everybody who gave their life to fight for the incredible freedom and opportunity and the blessing of living in this country, the United States of America. Thank you to all the soldiers, all the armed forces, all the servicemen and women, and all the people in law enforcement who gave the last full measure to enable us to live freely and securely in the United States. Thank you, and we dedicate our learning tonight to you. James Roth in the house from Indianapolis. Alice Gross says 2 Sundays. Yes, we had 2 Sundays. Stephen Giger says shalom. Nancy Brandimel Wright says the 2nd Sunday this week. Lana Kopiran says good evening from Michigan. Paul is in the house from Chicago. Alice is in from Baltimore. Beautiful. It's great to have you with us. Janice Beanstalk is in the house. Tom Beck from Pennsylvania. Michael Zemmel, great to see you. Paul Feldman in the house. Robin Stewart from Ohio. Shalom. Lynn Job from North Texas. Great to see you. Sammy Isaiah Rana. Great to have you with us, Sammy. Okay. So where are we holding? We are in Tractate Shabbos, Masechet Shabbos, the 2nd volume of the Talmud. We are on Daf Pei, page 80. We're in chapter 8. Tonight we're going to finish the Gemara on Mishnah number 2, and we're going to begin and end the 3rd Mishnah of chapter 8. It's a short Mishnah with a very short commentary, and then with God's help tomorrow, when we do page 81, we're already going to be into the 4th Mishnah. Okay, so here in this chapter 8, we're talking about minimum measures that you need to have in order for something to be significant. We're talking about becoming liable to bring a sin offering for unwittingly carrying something out from the private domain to the public domain on Shabbos. The first Mishnah was about liquids. The 2nd Mishnah is about certain objects and substances. Tonight we come to the case of ink. And we learn that one is liable if he has enough ink to write 2 letters. Sounds like a pretty small amount of ink, just enough to write 2 letters. And then the question is asked, well, the ink could take different forms. We might have some dry ink, to which we would need to add water. We might have some ink in the quill that we're going to write with. We might have some ink in the inkwell. And if we didn't have enough ink in either one of those 3 locations to write 2 letters, let's say there was just a dab of ink, just enough to write 1 letter in the inkwell, and just enough to write another letter in the quill, and we brought both objects outside, well, that wouldn't even make sense because the quill and the inkwell would be substantial in themselves. But somehow, if we were bringing the ink out, and the object wasn't going to make us liable for carrying, just the ink was going to, and we brought out the ink separately, some in the quill and some in the inkwell, could those 2 amounts combine to make us liable to bring the sin offering? Could they combine to be the minimum measure? And we don't receive an answer. We're told, teku, let the question stand. So before we look for an inner meaning on that, Let's do the next subject that we're going to look at about these minimum measures. And this has to do with bringing out half of a dried fig. Now, the volume, the bulk of a dried fig, we learned is how we measure the minimum measure for foods, for human foods, right? When we were looking at food for animals in the last chapter, and we saw that, if you had a mouthful of straw for a cow, that would be enough. But if it was the coarser kind of dried plant that you could feed a camel, it would be a larger amount. So those were cow food versus camel food, and lamb food versus sheep food. But when it came to human food, the amount that would make you liable for carrying on Shabbos was the volume of a dried fig. So here in chapter 8, in the second Mishnah, in the Gemara is on it, right? So the discussion of this Mishnah, we're going to have the question, well, what if you take out half a fig, literally half a fig, or literally a dried fig? Normally we use the dried fig just to understand the amount that would make you liable for any other food. But now we're literally talking about dried figs. So what if you took half of a dried fig with you when you went from your house out into the public domain? Would you be liable? No, because that's definitely less than the minimum measure. The minimum measure is the full dried fig. But the question continues, what if you took half a dried fig out with you, and then you put it down in the public domain, and then you went back inside, and then you brought another half of a dried fig and laid it beside the first half? Would you then be liable? You never carried out the minimum measure, right? You never walked from your house, from inside the house to outside the house, carrying a full dried fig. But between your two trips, you did carry out the full dried fig. You just did it half a fig at a time. So do those two separate actions of carrying combine to make us liable to bring the sin offering? And so some conditions are going to be placed on this. The first one is remember, this is an unwitting violation. If you did this intentionally, you wouldn't be liable to bring a sin offering. It would be worse, right? You would be liable to coarse, excision at the hands of heaven. But if you did this unwittingly, so how might this happen unwittingly? Well, you might have, just not thinking about it. You meant to eat it. You put it in your pocket. I don't know. And you did it twice. So if you did it twice within the same lapse of awareness, yes, you would be liable. But if you carried out the half fig and then you realize you did it, I shouldn't have done that. I definitely don't want to do that again. And then you did do it again. So this would be two separate lapses of awareness, and they would not combine to make you liable to bring the sin offering. They would have to happen in the same lapse of awareness. Likewise, if you brought it out to two separate domains, right? So they were both public domains, but they were separate public domains, and you couldn't go from one to the other. So then it would be deemed like you couldn't combine them. But if it was, let's say you brought it out to two private domains that had a barrier between them, but you could cross that barrier. Let's say there was a carmelit, which is a kind of intermediate domain, which is neither public nor private, but which you could carry the half fig through the carmelit to the other domain. So then, legally speaking, you could say that the two half figs that you brought out in two separate trips really did end up in the same domain. So then they would combine, and you would be liable to bring the sin offering. So the question is, we're talking about something, how much practical impact is this analysis really going to have? I mean, are we going to really make separate trips where we're somehow going to carry half the volume, which is a very small volume of food, and bring it out into the public domain, and that somehow they're going to combine and make us liable? I mean, this doesn't really, it's hard to imagine where this is practically going to come up in our lives. Now, our sages are going to go into many, in our journey through the Talmud, God willing, over the next 7 years, we're going to find many analyses like this of situations that are hypothetical, where we're trying to understand the law, the underlying law, but the hypothetical situation itself, it won't come up. It won't come up in the real world. right? So if we're just trying to understand the law, okay, so we're trying to understand what is it that makes somebody liable. Liable for what? Yesterday we were talking about somebody who's liable to pay money on a loan and a promissory note, that we're regulating the business relationships, contract relationships between people and other people. Now when we're talking about being liable to bring a sin offering because you carried on Shabbos, this is purely a matter between you and God. No one, there's no minimum measure police, looking over your shoulder to see, did you carry that minimum measure from your house out into the public domain? Okay, you're liable to bring the sin offering, especially since for the last 2,000 years, no one can bring a sin offering because we don't have a temple. What we're seeing here is that we need to examine our deeds very closely. And I think that underlying lesson, particularly here when we're talking about minimum measures, like really de minimis amounts that might render, that might combine to take us from, no, I really didn't do anything wrong, to, yes, I did do something wrong. To take us, the tiny little bit, no, I really didn't do anything wrong, and just a little bit more, and then like, yeah, I sinned against God. What is the lesson of that? I believe the sages are teaching us here that if we're going to sort of try to hold ourselves up to a higher standard, to act like mensches, right? Like human beings with a conscience that want to do good and do right in this world. So we have to be pretty particular with ourselves and how we behave. And I would say that a place for special attention in this regard would be the way that we manage our time, right? Because who among us can say that when we were doing a job, whether it was a job for our boss, or a job for ourselves, or a job for a charity, or a job for our parents, or some job that we were doing for other people where we felt, okay, we have a duty to do this job and to do it right, and we stole some time from the job, right? We didn't move as alacritously as we could have. We weren't as efficient as we could have been. We stole time from our employer. And particularly, we steal time from our Creator, right? Our Creator sent us into this world with a mission. So every time we waste time, and I'm as guilty as anyone else. I mean, there's so many things that I want to accomplish in this world, and there are times where I just do not, I don't summon up the motivation that I should. I don't use my time as wisely as I should. I'm just busy checking out one more story in the news or doing one more crossword puzzle, because it's going to exercise my mind and keep my aging brain fresh. But the truth is, I just enjoy doing it. Every time we steal moments like that, so often, it's only a few moments, right? We only stole a few moments. I mean, who's going to blame me for that? I'm human. Everybody steals a moment here and there. It's okay. It's not a big deal. What I think our sages are teaching us here when they say, that this half a fig combines with the other half fig and does create liability, is that those little moments that we steal here and there from the job that we should be doing, they do add up. They do add up. And if we're going to be honest with ourselves, we could say, we've wasted a lot of moments, and they add up to a theft, right? A theft from the mission that I should have been doing, whether it's a self-motivated mission or an employer's mission, a governmental mission, whatever the mission is that we signed up for to do the job, and then we steal a little bit of time for it. So those little moments we steal, they add up. They add up, and since they add up, it's something to pay attention to. It's something to say I could do better. It's something to atone for. And in making a proper atonement, it's not enough to regret, right? We have to organize ourselves to do better. One way to do that is to get a time management app and record our time. It's never been easier. Every smartphone now can have an app on it. Toggle is a good one. I recently started using that. And then as soon as I started using it, I got better with my time because I was seeing at the end of the day where my time went. And then you could slip out of the habit and say, oh, do I really have to track my time all the time? And I feel like this page today was here to remind me, yeah, you got to do that. You got to toggle your time. You got to use an app like Toggle, Toggl. I'm not working with them. They're not our partner. I just found that it was a very efficient, and I think it's free. I mean, it's an easy to use app. And you get better with time management when you track your time. Okay, that's on minimum measures that are insignificant adding up to become a significant minimum measure. Then we learn that with lime like that comes out of the ground, not the fruit, but is lime an element? I'm not sure, but the lime, it's used as a fertilizer. It's used in some construction materials. I think it's also used to make lye, which is like a very caustic and strong chemical. What is the minimum measure for carrying lime out on Shabbos? We're told it's enough to smear on the finger of a small girl. Why would you smear it? Because lime, if it's prepared in a certain way, it's sort of like a skin conditioner. I don't know if it's diluted enough, if it's made into a cream. It just makes the skin soft. But others say that the lime could be made into a substance that would sort of speed up a young girl's maturity. So if perhaps she had reached the age, this is in ancient times, where she could be married, but she physically wasn't prepared to get married, and then they would put some of this stuff on her skin. It might speed the maturation process so that she would be ready to get married a little bit sooner. And then, apropos of this, of anointing a girl's skin, and sometimes it is a little bit humorous when we have these sages in the study hall discussing feminine products and saying, well, this word means this and that word means that, and I have heard, and I feel like, did you just go home and ask your wife? I think if you would go home and ask your wife, you're gonna get the right answer a lot quicker than, just guessing what the word means with your fellow sages. And the answer is, I'm sure they did that. I think the reason why sometimes they get a word and they're not sure what it means is because it's inherited from an earlier age and another place where language was used a little bit differently, particularly in the ancient world, where if you just traveled a few days, 20, 40, 50 miles to another locality, I mean, they have really different culture, really different habits, and definitely different language, different words for some of the same things. And if they inherited a teaching, instead of assuming that they knew what the word meant, they were checking. They were checking with each other. Are you sure this is what the word means? Does the word mean the same here as it means 100 miles away? And being very careful with their use of language was quite important. And as we'll see, when they start talking about using these skin products, some are used not so much to remove the hair as almost like a mousse to flatten the hair. And then they're asking, well, where? Is it on the temple? Is it on the forehead? Is it on the back of the head? And just getting the proper meanings of these words is something that they're going to be very careful about. And that, my friends, is excellent advice for us. I will never forget, before I went to film school, I went to law school. I went to NYU Law School, and I was an English major at a pretty prestigious university back east. So I felt like I already, had a good understanding of the English language. But when I got to law school, I realized that I had been somewhat sloppy, somewhat ambiguous with my use of English all my life, like everybody else around me. Law school forces you to use language very precisely because when people agree to terms on a contract, they have to be agreeing to the same thing. And when you start looking at language that carefully, I just never forget this. It was first year of law school, and I suddenly started hearing English in a new way and realizing how often people who get into an argument, even a heated argument, because they feel so, that the person they're talking to disagrees on such a fundamental topic, and so often they didn't really disagree at all. What they disagreed on was their understanding of certain words that came between them. And what one of them was trying to say with the same word wasn't being heard by the other one. So it's very important when we get into a debate with someone. And by the way, likewise, I also heard that year in law school how very often people who feel like, well, we're on the same team, we agree. And actually, it's because they weren't being very specific in their use of language. And if they looked at it a little more closely, they would have realized that they didn't agree at all. And that's actually like a friendship or a working relationship that is eventually headed for trouble if they don't clarify their terms. And that's why whenever we engage in a debate, and especially if we're going to enter into some kind of an employment relationship, a business relationship, a contract to buy or sell, anything like that, but even in regular life, to have a debate, especially these days when people are so divided, it's very important to define our terms and say, let's make sure that we understand, what you mean when you use that word. Is it the same as what I mean when I use the same word? And when we're careful to define our terms at the outset of conversations, it's amazing how much more productive those conversations can be. Now we hear a story apropos of using lime as some kind of a skin conditioner. And I'll read it to you. It says, with regard to lime, the Gemara relates, Rav Beivai had a daughter, and he smeared her with lime limb by limb, meaning one limb at a time. That could mean one finger at a time, or one arm and then the other arm, one toe, then another toe, foot, the foot, leg, etc., but one limb at a time. And as a result, she became so beautiful that when marrying her off, he received 400 zuz in gifts beyond her dowry. Right? So that back then, marriage was much more of a contractual type of relationship, and you've heard of the dowry and the bride price, and that was something that was just normal back then. And I guess a man with a very beautiful daughter could expect to receive a higher bride price than one with one not so beautiful. It's just the way the world was. And so because her skin had been rubbed with this ointment limb by limb, it made her more radiant and beautiful, and she attracted a more worthy husband, let us say, for herself. Now, there was a certain non-Jew in Rav Beivai's neighborhood, and he had a daughter, and he wanted to do the same. What did he do? He smeared her entire body with lime at one time. He covered her whole body with this ointment made of lime. And tragically, she died. He said, Rav Beivai killed my daughter. Now, this is something people do. He was envious of his neighbor who had great success in marrying off his daughter. He wanted to have the same thing for himself and for his family. He misunderstood what Rav Beivai had done. Right? Rav Beivai had put the ointment on one limb at a time, and perhaps if you cover a child's entire skin with this, the skin can't breathe. It created some kind of a terrible reaction. Maybe just the daughter could take the lime and this man's daughter couldn't. Whatever the reason was, he got into this situation because of his own envy, and tragically the child ended up dying. And then he blames the guy that he was envious of. And he says, Rav Beivai killed my daughter. So this man went to Rav Nachman, who I guess was the leader in the area, and complained. Rav Nachman said, Rav Beivai, who drinks beer, his daughters require that they be smeared with lime, as beer causes hair growth. We, who do not drink beer, our daughters do not require that they be smeared with lime. Now, it's a little bit interesting, this story, because it was a non-Jew in a time where, the Talmudic time, especially, even in Babylonia, and I think this must have been in Babylonia rather than in Israel, because it says Rav Nachman and Rav Beivai. And if they're called Rav, it's more likely in Babylonia. And, but still the Jews were in danger. They were a minority, and from time to time there would be pogroms and persecutions and bad stuff. And so if this non-Jew is now accusing Beivai of, killing his daughter, but just because he, the neighbor, imitated what Beivai did with his own daughter, this could become a huge problem for the Jewish population. At least the guy doesn't go to complain to the governor and the police. He goes to the Jewish authority, goes to Nachman. Nachman says we, meaning you and me, you the non-Jew and me, a leader of the Jewish community, we're people together. We're brothers. We're neighbors. It's not you and us. So Rav Nachman was very smart and very careful in how he explained this, right? And what he didn't want to do is say, it's your fault that your daughter's dead. He's trying to be very compassionate, but he's got to explain what happened here. And somehow, I guess maybe this is a little bit flattering to the man that say, well, what you didn't understand is that Rav Beivai, he's actually like a more coarse person. Like, he drinks a lot of beer. The people in his family, because they drink a lot of beer instead of water, they get hairy, so they need to do this treatment. You couldn't have known that. Now you know, please don't try to go do this again. It's like their skin challenged, and that's why they do this treatment. It's not for everybody. I'm not sure exactly what the takeaway from that is, but it's an interesting story. It's an interesting story, certainly in terms of there's a lesson there about the neighbor, who in his own envy, he acted without thinking. And it's very harmful to himself and to his family. It's terrible. If he had gone to Rav Beivai and said, what is it that you do? How do you do it? I'd like to have the same kind of success as you. Could you teach me that? Probably Rav Beivai would have taught him. But this guy just sort of looked over the fence, thought he understood, and just jumped in on that technique. He wasn't careful enough and paid a steep price. When we hear a story where somebody brought, misfortune on themselves, I don't think the explanation is, hey, you were hasty, you made a mistake, blame yourself. I think like Rav Nachman, we have to find a way to have a very light touch, be kind and compassionate about it, and at least help the person see what happened so that they don't come to make such a mistake again, but hopefully without blaming them, right? Without making them feel terrible. The guy feels terrible enough. You want to get it so he won't make such a mistake again without adding to his pain. Maybe that's what we're learning there. That is going to wrap up our discussion of the second Mishnah. And just very quickly, in the third Mishnah, we learned some more minimum measures. These are for carrying earth, dirt, for carrying fine sand and coarse sand, and a reed, which can be used to make a quill, or that it can be burned. And we learned some different amounts for these substances. The one that's interesting is the use of coarse sand. What is the minimum measure for sand? It's enough to make a spoonful of plaster, right? So sand is used in plaster. If you've ever seen a stucco going up on a house, you've seen how it's basically they're mixing cement and then putting it on the side of the house. But we learn in the Gemara about this that we learn from Rav Yehuda that you cannot plaster a house with a beautiful and perfect white plaster. You have to mix some sand into it that will make it imperfect. Why? Why do we have to make the building material of our house not perfect? We have to go out of our way to make it imperfect. Rav Yehuda would do that by mixing some sand, some coarse sand, into the plaster. That would change the color, change the consistency a little bit. Our sages said you don't have to do it that way, but even if you use the very beautiful white plaster all over your house, you have to leave at least a square cubit, right? So about 18 inches, about the distance from the elbow to the finger, a square, about that size, right? Unplastered in your house, on the outside of your house. Why? Because we mourn the loss of the temple. right? As long as we don't have a temple, even though we now, meaning in the time of the sages, once the temple was lost in its place, right? So after about 150 years of developing it, they got the Mishnah to a place where they could write it down, and it is a replacement for the temple. And the Talmud came along about 300 years later, and together the Mishnah and the Gemara, which add up to the Talmud, in a sense, it is our temple, right? All of the practices that were given to us in the Torah and that we can no longer do, like bringing sacrifices, like when we come liable to bring a sin offering, what was the sin offering? Why would we have to bring it? How do we bring it, etc.? This replaces the temple, and in many ways, it's better because we can study these practices and pray in a way that we didn't pray when the temple existed, and we can make teshuvah, make atonement in a way that we didn't when the temple existed. There's many wonderful things that came out of the rabbinic post-temple tradition, but nevertheless, our joy can never be complete when the temple does not stand, because there's so many mitzvahs, so many commandments in the Torah that can only be fulfilled when the temple is standing. And also, we miss God. Now, we know that God is everywhere. We're in God. God is here right now. God is in our classroom with us right now, and I hope He approves of this teaching. But the fact is, when the temple stands, there's a manifestation of God that is much more tangible. You can feel it, right? You can almost see it. There are certain miracles, daily miracles, that were always present in the temple, and those are gone now, and we miss them. And so, as long as we don't have a temple, our joy cannot be complete. And if we build a new and beautiful house, we leave one square cubit unplastered as a sign of that incomplete joy. It's the same reason that when we have a wedding, we break a glass at the wedding. A wedding is thought to be like the most joyful day in a person's life, but our joy cannot be complete in the absence of a temple. So we do one little symbolic thing to remind ourselves that we lost the temple and that our joy is not complete. That's what I've got for us today. Let me scan the comments to see if we have any questions or comments for our discussion. Okay. Freda Cohen says, I was an English major who went to law, so she knows what I'm talking about. Paula says, when discussing feminine products, you found that amusing. Lana says, oh my God, yes, they don't discuss definitions. I remember I was once doing an interview with Rabbi David Aaron in Jerusalem, and we talked about a bunch of different subjects, from why the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer in this world, to, why do we say blessing when we see a rainbow in the sky and we don't look at it. The Talmud instructs us, don't gaze at a rainbow. You can look at it, say the blessing, but don't keep staring at it, because it's actually thought to be like an immodest look at one of the aspects of the glory of God. We talked about many subjects, but every time we opened a new subject, Rabbi Aaron would always say, okay, let's define our terms. Let's make sure that the question that you're asking is going to be the one that I am answering. So I hear you saying, and then I would say, yes, that's my question, or no, actually, what I meant to ask is, and we would clarify the question at the beginning of the discussion. I cannot tell you how valuable that is in every relationship, every friendship, every employment discussion, every spousal conversation or argument, God forbid, with our parents, with our kids, with our cousins, with our teachers, with the guy at the gas station, everybody. Clarify your terms before you get deeper into the conversation. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Lana says, when I was talking about that we have to be very mindful of our time and examine, do we steal time from a mission that we've been given? And Lana says, well, what about when the employer steals time from you on your days off? Are you allowed to take the same amount of breaks at work? Well, I would say that if you feel your employer is stealing time from you, you got to bring up that issue to your employer. I think if we feel that we've been stolen from, we don't steal back. Right? That's not the way we handle it. We confront, we do it politely, we do it overtly, we do it openly, We do it with having done our research and having evidence before us so that we can prove what we're saying. But I think what we don't want to do is that we feel if somebody took advantage of us, that we're going to take advantage of them back. Better to say, hey, I believe you took advantage of me. Here's how you took advantage of me on this, and this occasion. This is how it happened. Here's my proposed solution going forward so that this doesn't happen again and so that you can make up what I feel that you took from me. That would be, I would say, the way to handle that. Okay. That's what I've got for us today. And I guess, and Kathleen is saying, what do you mean clarify? And I'm saying that at the beginning of a conversation, especially when we're going to get into an argument, we need to clarify what words we're using. Like, what is it that we're arguing about? You know, we're arguing about somebody's position on some issue. So you say, well, what I understand your position is, and then state their position. And then that may require that certain words be defined, right? The key words in the sentence, the key words that express the person you're talking with, their position. Don't just say what you think their point is. Actually say, and I believe the word, you know, the definition of what you're saying. I don't know. We're arguing about, we're arguing about, I feel that you've been wasting time that you should have been dedicating to this project that you and I are tasked to do together. We're a team, right? We have to do the work together and we split up the labor. I'm going to do the research, you're going to do the writing, and now we come back together and I feel like you didn't do enough, right? And so let's say, okay, I would like to discuss about how we've been using our time. Now, when I say time, the word time, like, does that really need defining? It might. When I say time, I'm actually talking about, 6-minute increments. Or when I say time, I mean not just the time that is at work, but also time away from work that could be dedicated to the project because we're in a crunch. That's what I mean by we have to define our terms so that we're sure we're talking about the same issues. That's what I learned in that first year of law school. That's what I learned every day, over and over again. In the Talmud, our sages are very careful to define their terms whenever they're discussing any issue at all, and to make sure they're using the same words, but they want to make sure that the person they're talking with understands those words the same way that they do. That's what I've got for us today. May we grow in wisdom every day, and may we grow in clarity so that when we're having conversations with people, we feel they're getting heated, perhaps we can diffuse that anger or strife by coming to realize that we care about the same things, but we've actually just expressed ourselves differently. That can often happen, and such a conversation and clarification can bring us closer together in our homes, in our families, at our workplaces, etc. All the best, my holy brothers.